The icy wind howled across the barren Wisconsin landscape, tearing at Gabriella O'Malley's threadbare cloak as she stumbled through knee-deep snow. Her family's wagon tracks already disappearing in the relentless blizzard of 1871. The sound of their departure still echoed in her ears, a cruel goodbye that left her abandoned on the frozen trail, miles from Mineral Point and any semblance of civilization. "Please come back," she screamed into the wind, her voice swallowed by the howling storm. 20 winters she had lived, but never had Gabriella imagined dying alone in one, cast out by her own blood. The bitter betrayal stung worse than the cold. Her stepfather's final words replayed in her mind. "One less mouth to feed. The weak don't survive winters like this." Her mother had simply turned away, cradling her new infant son, choosing her second family over her firstborn daughter. Gabriella's legs buckled beneath her as the cold penetrated her bones. The snow almost felt warm now as she collapsed into its deadly embrace. Consciousness slipped away like water through fingers as the blizzard continued its relentless assault. This was to be her grave, she thought, unmarked and forgotten in the vast whiteness. The sound came distantly at first, the rhythmic crunch of hooves breaking through snow, the creak of leather, a low whistle cutting through the wind. Gabriella forced her eyes open, certain it was a hallucination born of her freezing mind. Through the curtain of falling snow, a dark figure appeared atop a massive stallion, silhouetted against the dying daylight. Miss, can you hear me?" A deep voice, warm and urgent, penetrated her frozen stupor. Strong arms lifted her from the snow, cradling her against a solid chest. "Stay with me now. Don't you go closing those eyes." Warmth enveloped her as a heavy buffalo hide coat wrapped around her shivering form. Through frost-rimmed lashes, she caught glimpses of a strong jawline, concerned eyes the color of summer skies, and a face weathered by sun and wind. The cowboy lifted her onto his horse, mounting behind her and holding her secure against his chest. "Name's Vaughn Adams," he said, urging his horse forward. "And I reckon you're about the luckiest unfortunate soul I've come across in these parts." Gabriella tried to respond, but her lips refused to form words. She simply leaned back against his solid warmth, surrendering to the darkness. Vaughn's cabin appeared through the snow like a beacon of salvation, small but sturdy, with golden lamplight spilling from its windows and smoke curling from the chimney. He carried Gabriella's limp form inside, laying her gently before the crackling hearth where flames leaped high against the stone. "Don't you die on me now, miss," he murmured, removing her frozen boots and replacing them with thick woolen socks. He rubbed life back into her blue-tinged fingers, his calloused hands gentle but insistent. What kind of fool would leave someone out in this weather? The cabin was modest, but well-appointed, a testament to a man who lived alone but did so with purpose. Rifles hung above the fireplace, alongside dried herbs and a few cooking implements. A solid wooden table stood in the center of the room, a single chair beside it. A neatly made bed occupied one corner, and it was there that Vaughn carried Gabriella once color began returning to her cheeks. "Rest now," he said, tucking heavy quilts around her. "Storm's not letting up tonight." When Gabriella next opened her eyes, morning light filtered through frosted windows. The blizzard had stopped, leaving an unearthly silence in its wake. She blinked, trying to orient herself in the unfamiliar surroundings. Her body ached, but she was alive, a miracle considering the circumstances. "You're awake." Vaughn's voice came from the fireplace where he stood stirring something in a cast iron pot, beginning to wonder if you'd sleep straight through to spring. Gabriella struggled to sit up. "How long have I been here?" 2 days, he replied, ladling steaming broth into a wooden bowl. "Fever broke last night. Reckon you're tougher than you look." He approached with the bowl, his movements deliberate, as if trying not to startle her. In the clear light of day, Gabriella could see him properly tall and broad-shouldered, perhaps 30 years of age, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong, clean-shaven face. His eyes were indeed blue, creased at the corners from years squinting against the sun. Dark hair fell in waves to his collar, and he wore simple, practical clothes: a flannel shirt, wool vest, and denim trousers tucked into well-worn boots. "Thank you," she said, accepting the broth with trembling hands. "For saving my life. Vaughn nodded, settling onto a stool beside the bed. Mind telling me what you were doing out there alone? These mountains are no place for anyone in winter, let alone a young woman by herself. Gabriella stared into the steaming bowl, shame and anger warring within her. My family. They left me. We were traveling from Minnesota to Oregon Territory. Food was running low, my stepfather said. Her voice caught. He said I wasn't worth the rations. Vaughn's expression hardened. What kind of man leaves his own kin to die? He's not my blood, Gabriella said bitterly. My real father died when I was 12. Mother remarried within the year. Thomas never wanted me around, always said I was an extra burden. When the baby came last spring, I became even less important. She took a sip of broth, its warmth spreading through her chest. There were 7 of us in that wagon, my mother, Thomas, his parents, his brother, the baby, and me. When the blizzard hit and we ran low on supplies, they took a vote. A bitter smile twisted her lips. I lost. Vaughn rose abruptly, pacing the small cabin with barely contained fury. That's not a family. That's a pack of wolves turning on their own. He stopped, gazing out at the white landscape. How far did you walk before I found you? Miles, I think. I lost track after the first hour. Gabriella's eyes filled with tears. I kept hoping they'd come back for me. Vaughn returned to her side, his voice gentle now. Miss Gabriella, she supplied. Gabriella O'Malley. Miss O'Malley, I've got no right to make promises to you, seeing as we're strangers, but I give you my word you're safe here until you decide what's next. Gabriella nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. For the first time in years, someone was offering her shelter without calculating her worth. The next week passed in a strange, peaceful rhythm. As Gabriella's strength returned, she insisted on helping with chores around the cabin. Vaughn, she learned, was a former cavalry scout who had claimed this land after the war, building the cabin himself and raising horses on the surrounding acreage. He lived alone, trading with Mineral Point for necessities, but otherwise keeping to himself. Town's about 8 miles southwest, he explained one evening as they shared a rabbit stew. Good people mostly, but I prefer the quiet up here. Don't you get lonely? Gabriella asked, then blushed at her boldness. Vaughn considered this, turning his coffee cup between calloused hands. Reckon I got used to my own company. War changes a man's need for noise. Gabriella sensed the shadows behind his words but didn't press. Instead, she told him about her childhood in Minnesota, her father's work as a blacksmith, and her dreams of someday teaching school. I can read and cipher better than most, she said proudly. Father made sure of that before he died. Vaughn smiled, a rare expression that transformed his serious face. Noticed your eyes light up when you spotted my books. He nodded toward a small shelf containing perhaps a dozen volumes. Not much of a collection, but you're welcome to them. True to his word, Vaughn made no advances toward Gabriella, treating her with a distant courtesy that was nevertheless kind. He slept on a pallet near the fire, insisting she keep the bed. During days when the weather cleared, he tended his horses in the nearby barn, returning with snow melting in his hair and his cheeks reddened from the cold. As January deepened into February, Gabriella's guilt at imposing grew. I should find work in town, she said one morning as they shared breakfast. I can't continue being a burden to you. Vaughn frowned. You're no burden. Winter's the wrong time to be looking for positions anyway. Wait for spring. But your supplies are plentiful, he interrupted. I always stock for harder winters than this. The truth was, Vaughn had grown accustomed to her presence. The cabin felt different with her there, warmer somehow, despite the bitter cold outside. He found himself lingering over meals, inventing tasks that kept him indoors, just to hear her voice as she read aloud from his books or shared stories from her past. The blizzard returned in mid-February, fierce and unrelenting. For 3 days, the world outside disappeared in white fury, the wind screaming around the cabin's sturdy walls. On the second night, as they sat before the fire, Gabriella finally asked the question that had been on her mind. Why did you save me, Mr. Adams? You could have ridden past. Vaughn stoked the fire, buying time before answering. Couldn't leave a person to die, miss. Wouldn't be right. Many would have, she pressed. Especially a stranger. He turned to face her, firelight casting half his face in shadow. During the war, I saw men left behind, good men. I swore I'd never do the same given the choice. He hesitated. And when I found you there in the snow something, I can't explain it rightly, just knew I couldn't ride on. The confession hung between them, honest and unadorned. Gabriella felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. I'm glad you didn't, she said softly. That night, as the storm howled outside, something changed between them, a barrier lowered, a trust established. When Vaughn smiled at her across the breakfast table the next morning, Gabriella felt her heart quicken in a way that both frightened and exhilarated her. As February gave way to March, the first hints of spring began to appear. Snow melted in patches, revealing the dormant earth beneath. Gabriella ventured outside more frequently, helping Vaughn with the horses and learning the rhythms of ranch life. You've got away with them, Vaughn observed one afternoon as she brushed down his favorite mare, a dappled gray named Athena. Most city folk are skittish around horses this size. My father kept 2 draft horses for his smithy, she explained. I used to help groom them. Watching her with the animals, Vaughn felt a dangerous longing take root. He'd lived alone so long, convinced himself it was better that way. But now, seeing her move about his home with increasing confidence, he could no longer deny the truth. He wanted her to stay. The question came to a head in late March when the trail to town finally cleared enough for travel. Vaughn hitched his wagon, preparing for his monthly supply run to Mineral Point. I'd like to come with you, Gabriella said, appearing at his side in a clean dress she'd mended from fabric he'd provided. Perhaps there are positions available now. Vaughn's hands stilled on the harness. You still set on leaving, then? Gabriella studied his face, searching for something in his expression. I can't impose on your kindness forever, Mr. Adams. Vaughn, he corrected automatically, and you're not imposing. A moment passed between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Vaughn nodded. Town's muddy this time of year. Best wear the boots I gave you. The journey to Mineral Point took nearly 3 hours, the wagon wheels struggling through mud and melting snow. As they crested the final hill, Gabriella caught her breath at the sight of the settlement below, a bustling frontier town nestled in a valley, its buildings a mixture of limestone, wood, and brick. Bigger than I expected, she admitted. It's growing, Vaughn said. Lead mining brought the first settlers, but farming and commerce keep it alive now. They made their way down the main street, drawing curious glances from townspeople unaccustomed to seeing Vaughn Adams with company. He guided the wagon to a general store with Peterson's Mercantile painted above its door. Vaughn Adams, as I live and breathe. The shopkeeper, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, emerged onto the porch. Thought the winter might have buried you up in those hills. Takes more than snow to keep me down, Eric, Vaughn replied, helping Gabriella from the wagon. Eric's eyebrows rose at the sight of her. And who might this young lady be? Miss Gabriella O'Malley, Vaughn said. She's been staying at my place while recovering from an unfortunate incident. Eric's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. Pleasure to meet you, Miss O'Malley. Any friend of Vaughn's is welcome here. Inside the store, Gabriella wandered the aisles while Vaughn discussed his supply needs with Eric. The shelves held an array of goods that seemed luxurious after months in the cabin bolts of printed fabric, jars of candy, leather-bound journals, and glass bottles of perfume. Your lady friend seems mighty interested in the writing supplies, Eric observed, following Vaughn's gaze to where Gabriella examined a set of pencils. She's not my. Vaughn began, then stopped. She's looking for work in town, teaching preferably, Eric nodded thoughtfully. As it happens, Mrs. Holloway at the school's been taken ill. Doctor says she won't be teaching again. Town council's been searching for someone educated enough to take over. Vaughn felt his heart sink. Is that so? Pays room and board plus a small salary, Eric continued, oblivious to Vaughn's discomfort. If your Miss O'Malley can read and figure, she might be just what they're looking for. When Gabriella rejoined them, Eric wasted no time sharing the news about the teaching position. Her eyes lit with excitement. The schoolhouse is just down the street, Eric said. Mayor Stevens lives in the big house on the corner. He's head of the town council. You'll want to speak with him directly. Gabriella turned to Vaughn, her expression questioning. He managed a tight smile. Go on. I'll finish up here." As she hurried from the store, Eric studied Vaughn's face. "You've grown fond of her." Vaughn busied himself examining a new hunting knife. "Just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Eric said quietly. "Not you ordinarily. Never seen you bring anyone to town before, let alone a pretty young woman." Vaughn said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. By the time Gabriella returned, flushed with excitement, Vaughn had loaded their supplies and was waiting outside the store. She practically danced up to the wagon, her happiness palpable. "Mayor Stevens says I can start next week," she exclaimed. "There are 12 students ranging from 6 to 15 years. I'll have living quarters behind the schoolhouse. It's small but quite suitable." Her excitement faltered as she noticed Vaughn's subdued reaction. "Isn't it wonderful news?" "Very fortunate," he agreed, helping her into the wagon. "Congratulations." The return journey was quieter, tension growing with each passing mile. Gabriella spoke enthusiastically about her plans for teaching, while Vaughn responded with single words or brief phrases, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Finally, as the cabin came into view, Gabriella could bear it no longer. "Have I done something to upset you?" Vaughn drew the wagon to a halt, sighing heavily. "No, Gabriella, you've done nothing wrong." "Then why won't you look at me?" she pressed. "Since we left town, you've hardly spoken 2 words together." He turned to her then, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I don't want you to go," he admitted, the words falling between them like stones. "Selfish as it sounds, I've grown used to having you at the cabin, but I've no right to ask you to stay, not when you've found respectable work that suits your talents." Gabriella's breath caught. "You want me to stay?" "More than I should," he confessed. "But the town can offer you more than I can people your age, society, a future." "What if I told you," she said carefully, "that I've had my fill of society, that perhaps what I value now is something different?" Vaughn studied her face, afraid to hope. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Gabriella continued, gathering her courage, "that these past months have taught me what truly matters, and what matters to me isn't found in town." Before Vaughn could respond, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepening as Vaughn responded, one hand coming up to cradle her face. When they finally parted, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "You should think carefully about this, Gabriella. I'm not an easy man to live with, set in my ways." She smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I've noticed, and yet here I am, still wanting to stay." That evening, as they sat before the fire, plans unfolded between them. Gabriella would take the teaching position but return to the ranch on weekends and holidays. As spring progressed into summer, they would see if their feelings remained steadfast. And if they do. She asked, nestled against his side. Vaughn kissed the top of her head. "Then I'll build us a proper house with room for books and whatever else you desire." "I don't need much," she assured him. "Just this, just you." The following Monday, Vaughn drove Gabriella to town to begin her new position. The schoolhouse was a simple structure, painted white with a small bell tower. Behind it stood her quarters, a tidy one-room dwelling with a bed, table, chair, and small stove. "It's perfect," she declared, arranging her few possessions on the shelves. Vaughn lingered in the doorway, reluctant to leave. "I'll come for you Friday afternoon, or sooner if you send word." She crossed to him, straightening his collar with familiar ease. "I'll be counting the hours." Their goodbye kiss was witnessed by several curious townspeople, setting tongues wagging immediately. By midweek, everyone in Mineral Point knew that the mysterious new schoolteacher was somehow connected to the reclusive Vaughn Adams. Gabriella proved to be a natural teacher, winning over even the most reluctant students with her patience and creativity. The parents, initially wary of an outsider, soon sang her praises at church and in the general store. "Miss O'Malley has Timothy reading at last," one mother reported proudly. 2 years with Mrs. Holloway couldn't accomplish what she's done in 3 weeks. When Friday came, Gabriella watched the clock anxiously, dismissing her students the moment the hour struck. She had barely finished tidying the classroom when the sound of hoofbeats announced Vaughn's arrival. He appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Good afternoon, Miss O'Malley," she smiled, crossing to him. "Mr. Adams, right on time." The weekends at the ranch became Gabriella's refuge, a time to shed the formality required of a schoolteacher and simply be herself. Together, they worked the land, tended the horses, and in the evenings sat before the fire planning their future. As May bloomed into June, Vaughn began construction on a new home adjacent to the cabin. Gabriella helped when she could, learning to saw boards and hammer nails under his patient instruction. 2 bedrooms, he explained one Saturday as they surveyed the framework, and a proper kitchen. Even ordered glass windows from St. Louis. Gabriella traced the outline of what would be their bedroom. "It's more than I ever dreamed of having." "Is it enough, though?" Vaughn asked, the insecurity unusual for him. "Town life offers more comforts." She took his hand, leading him to the edge of the property where wildflowers carpeted a gentle slope. "Look around, Vaughn. This is everything I want." She gestured toward the distant mountains, the forest edge, the creek winding through their land. "Freedom, beauty, peace, you." He pulled her close, his kiss conveying what words could not. When they finally separated, Vaughn reached into his pocket, withdrawing something small. "I've been carrying this for weeks," he admitted, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold band. "Wanted to wait until the house was finished, but I'm finding I'm not a patient man where you're concerned." Gabriella's eyes widened. "Vaughn, I can't offer you much beyond this land and my promise to cherish you all my days," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But if you'll have me, I'd count myself the luckiest man in Wisconsin." Tears spilled down Gabriella's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." The wedding took place in late July, a simple ceremony in Mineral Point's white-steepled church. Eric Peterson stood as Vaughn's best man, while Mrs. Holden, the mayor's wife who had become Gabriella's friend, served as matron of honor. The entire town turned out, curious to witness the union of their beloved schoolteacher and the once reclusive rancher. "Never thought I'd see the day," Eric commented as they signed the registry. Vaughn Adams, married man. Vaughn couldn't stop smiling, his eyes rarely leaving his bride. "Neither did I." Their wedding night was spent in the newly completed house, furnished simply but comfortably. Moonlight spilled through the glass windows, illuminating Gabriella's face as she crossed the threshold in Vaughn's arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Adams," he whispered, setting her gently on her feet. She turned slowly, taking in the polished wood floors, the stone fireplace, the handcrafted furniture. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," he admitted, drawing her close, "but we have a lifetime to figure out the rest." As summer faded into autumn, they settled into a rhythm, Gabriella teaching during the week, returning to the ranch each Friday evening. Vaughn expanded his horse business, breeding and training stock that became known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. In December, as the first anniversary of their meeting approached, Gabriella shared news that left Vaughn speechless with joy. "A baby." He repeated, his hand gently covering her still flat stomach. "You're certain?" she nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. By summer's end, we'll be 3 instead of 2. That night, Vaughn held her close beneath the quilts, his hand protective over the place where their child grew. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed. "A family of my own." "Nor I," Gabriella whispered. "Not after my mother's betrayal," he kissed her forehead. "Our child will never know such coldness. I swear it." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through winter and spring, though Gabriella's condition eventually became apparent enough that she had to relinquish her teaching duties by May. The town council, understanding of her circumstances, promised her position would remain open should she wish to return. "Take all the time you need with your little one," Mayor Stevens assured her. "Good teachers are rare enough that we're willing to wait." June brought relentless heat and the final stages of pregnancy. Vaughn rarely left Gabriella's side, delegating ranch work to a young hand he'd hired from town. He read to her in the evenings, massaged her swollen ankles, and spent hours crafting a cradle from oak harvested on their land. The baby arrived on a sweltering August night, a healthy boy with Vaughn's dark hair and Gabriella's green eyes. They named him Victor James Adams after both their fathers. "He's perfect," Vaughn whispered, holding his son for the first time. "Absolutely perfect." Gabriella watched them together, her heart full to bursting. He has your chin, she observed, and your hands. Poor child, Vaughn joked, though his voice was thick with emotion. Let's hope he has your brains and patience to compensate. As autumn painted the Wisconsin landscape in golds and crimsons, Gabriella stood on the porch of their home, Victor sleeping against her shoulder. The valley spread before her, their land green and thriving. In the distance, Vaughn worked with the horses, his figure familiar and beloved. 3 years had passed since her family had abandoned her to die in the snow. The betrayal, once a wound that seemed impossible to heal, had faded to a distant scar. In its place stood something stronger, a family built on choice rather than blood, on love freely given rather than obligation. Vaughn caught sight of her and waved, then began walking toward the house. Gabriella smiled, bouncing Victor gently as he stirred. "Look," she whispered to her son, "there's your father coming home to us." And in that moment, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Gabriella knew with absolute certainty. She had finally found where she belonged. As the seasons continued their eternal cycle, the Adams family prospered on their land outside Mineral Point. Their ranch, once Vaughn's solitary refuge, became known for both its fine horses and its warm hospitality. Travelers passing through often found themselves invited to share a meal, Gabriella's natural kindness making everyone feel welcome. Victor grew from an infant to a sturdy toddler, his father's shadow whenever Vaughn was within sight. By his 3rd birthday, he was already attempting to help with the horses, solemnly carrying small buckets of grain with determined concentration. Just like his father, Gabriella would say fondly, watching them together, serious about his responsibilities. "He's got your heart, though," Vaughn would respond. "Never seen a child so quick to offer comfort when something's hurt." In the spring of 1875, their family expanded again with the arrival of twins, a boy and girl they named Samuel and Catherine. The double blessing left them exhausted but overjoyed, their home suddenly full of the chaos and joy that multiple children bring. 3 children under 5, Gabriella laughed one evening, collapsing beside Vaughn on the porch after finally getting all 3 to sleep. "I never imagined such wonderful madness." Vaughn took her hand, kissing her palm tenderly. "Regrets?" She leaned against his shoulder, watching fireflies begin their evening dance over the meadow. "Not a single one." The ranch continued to expand as well. Vaughn's reputation as a horse breeder brought customers from as far as Chicago, willing to pay premium prices for his stock. With the additional income, they added a 2nd story to their home and constructed a larger barn with proper stables. Gabriella resumed teaching part-time when the twins turned 2, riding into town 3 days a week, while Vaughn managed the children with the help of a local girl they'd hired. The arrangement suited them. Both Gabriella maintained her connection to education while still having ample time with her family. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm, marked by the changing seasons and their children's milestones. Victor started school, proudly carrying his slate and books. The twins followed 2 years later, Catherine already showing signs of her mother's love for reading, Samuel exhibiting his father's quiet determination. When Victor turned 10, Vaughn took him on his first proper cattle drive to the railhead in Madison, a coming-of-age journey that left the boy bursting with stories for weeks afterward. Gabriella listened patiently to each retelling, her heart swelling with pride at the bond between father and son. "You're raising him right," she told Vaughn one night as they lay together in the darkness. "Showing him how to be a good man." "Trying to," Vaughn replied, his voice thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder if I know enough to teach him." Gabriella propped herself on one elbow, looking down at her husband's face in the moonlight filtering through their window. "You know the important things: honesty, hard work, kindness. The rest he'll figure out alongside you." As the children grew, so did the legends surrounding their parents' meeting. Victor especially loved hearing how his father had rescued his mother from certain death in the blizzard, though Gabriella was careful never to share the full truth of her abandonment until the children were older. "Why did you have to be saved, Mama?" Catherine asked one evening as Gabriella tucked her into bed. "Were you lost?" Gabriella smoothed her daughter's dark curls. "In a way, sweetheart, I was trying to find my place in the world. Your father helped me discover where I belonged." The winter of 1882 brought an unexpected visitor to their door, a travel-worn man with a weathered face and desperate eyes. Gabriella answered his knock, Victor standing protectively nearby, now a tall youth of 14. "Pardon, madam," the stranger said, removing his hat. "I'm searching for a woman named Gabriella O'Malley. Might have come through these parts about 10, 11 years back." Gabriella felt the blood drain from her face. "I'm Gabriella Adams now. Who's asking?" The man's eyes widened. "It is you, Lord above." He swallowed hard. "I'm James Foster, your uncle on your mother's side. Been tracking you for months." Vaughn appeared behind her, his presence solid and reassuring. "What business do you have with my wife?" James Foster twisted his hat nervously. "It's about her mother, sir. She's dying. Consumption's got her. She sent me to find Gabriella to make amends if possible." Silence fell, broken only by the sound of the twins playing in the next room, oblivious to the tension at the door. "Where is she?" Gabriella finally asked, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. "Sacramento," James replied. "They made it to California after all. Your stepfather died 2 years back, mining accident." Gabriella felt Vaughn's hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. "The baby, my half-brother, Thomas Jr., he's 12 now. Good boy." Vaughn guided her away from the door. "Mr. Foster, please come in. You look cold and hungry. We can discuss this matter properly by the fire." That evening, after the children were asleep, Gabriella and Vaughn sat with James Foster as he detailed the hard years her mother's family had experienced in California. The gold rush dreams had proven empty, forcing Thomas to work dangerous mining jobs while her mother took in laundry. "She never forgave herself," James said quietly, "for leaving you, said it haunts her dreams." Gabriella stared into the fire, her emotions too complex to name. She could have stopped it, could have spoken up. "Yes," James agreed, surprising her with his honesty. "She could have. She was weak, Gabriella, always has been, but she's trying to do right by you now at the end." Vaughn, who had remained silent through most of the conversation, finally spoke. "What exactly does she want from my wife?" James sighed. "To see her once more, to apologize face to face, and—" He hesitated. "To ask if you might consider taking in the boy. There's no one else." The request hung in the air, momentous and unexpected. Gabriella looked to Vaughn, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make tonight." Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, Gabriella paced while Vaughn watched from their bed. "She abandoned me to die," she said, anger and hurt evident in every word. "Left me in a blizzard without a backward glance, and now she wants forgiveness, wants me to raise her son." "You don't owe her anything," Vaughn said quietly. "Not your presence, not your forgiveness, certainly not taking responsibility for the boy." Gabriella stopped pacing, tears filling her eyes. "But he's innocent in all this, my brother." Vaughn held out his arms and she went to him, sinking onto the bed beside him. "What do you want to do?" he asked, holding her close. "I think I need to go," she whispered against his chest. "Not for her, but for me, to finish this story properly." Vaughn nodded, kissing the top of her head. "Then we'll go, all of us, together." The journey to Sacramento took nearly 2 weeks, first by train to Chicago, then on the Transcontinental Railroad westward. The children, initially excited by the adventure, grew restless as the days passed, though Victor did his best to entertain the twins with stories and games. Gabriella spent the hours watching the landscape change, from the familiar fields and forests of the Midwest to the vast plains, then the towering mountains, and finally the golden foothills of California. Throughout it all, Vaughn remained her anchor, steady and supportive as he had been since the day he found her in the snow. They arrived in Sacramento on a warm April afternoon, the city bustling with commerce and the lingering energy of the gold rush era. James Foster met them at the station, guiding them through streets crowded with people from every corner of the world. "She's not long for this world," he warned as they approached a modest house on the outskirts of town. "Took a turn for the worse after I left to find you." Gabriella gripped Vaughn's hand tightly as they entered the small dwelling. The front room was clean but sparsely furnished, with a few worn chairs and a table. A young boy, Thomas Jr., sat at the table, his expression guarded as he watched the strangers enter. "She's through there," James said, indicating a doorway covered by a faded curtain. Gabriella hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "I'd like to see her alone first." Vaughn squeezed her hand. "We'll be right here." The sick room was dim and close, smelling of illness and medicine. On a narrow bed lay a woman Gabriella barely recognized, her mother, once beautiful, now gaunt and gray, her breathing labored and wheezing. "Mother," Gabriella said, her voice neither warm nor cold. Elizabeth O'Malley Foster's eyes fluttered open, widening as they focused on her daughter. "Gabriella," she whispered, her voice a thread, "is it really you? It's me." Gabriella remained standing at the foot of the bed, unwilling yet to move closer. Tears spilled from her mother's sunken eyes. "I never thought, never dared hope you'd come." "I almost didn't," Gabriella admitted. "I deserve that," Elizabeth acknowledged, each word clearly an effort. "What I did, there's no excuse." "No," Gabriella agreed, "there isn't." Elizabeth's thin hand clutched at the blanket. "Are you well? Have you been safe all these years?" The question broke something in Gabriella, the careful composure she'd maintained since arriving. "No thanks to you," she said, her voice breaking. "Do you know what happened after you left me? Do you even care?" "Every day," Elizabeth whispered. "I've imagined it every day." "I nearly froze to death," Gabriella said, moving closer despite herself. "Would have if a stranger hadn't found me in the snow. A man with more humanity than my own family showed me." Fresh tears coursed down Elizabeth's hollow cheeks. "I wanted to go back for you. Thomas wouldn't allow it. Said what was done. And you listened to him, again." The old hurt rose like bile in Gabriella's throat. "Just like when he decided I wasn't worth feeding, worth keeping. I was weak," Elizabeth admitted. "Too weak to stand against him, too weak to protect you. I failed you in every way a mother could fail her child." She reached out a trembling hand. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Gabriella, I know that, but I need you to hear that not a day has passed that I haven't regretted what I did." Gabriella looked at the withered hand extended toward her and after a long moment took it in her own. "I have a family now," she said. "A husband who would move heaven and earth for me, 3 beautiful children, a home built on love and trust." "I'm glad," Elizabeth whispered, "so glad." "I found happiness despite what you did," Gabriella continued. "Not because of anything you taught me, but because I chose to believe in love again." Elizabeth nodded weakly. "You were always the strongest of us." Her eyes drifted toward the curtained doorway. "And Thomas Jr., have you seen him?" "Briefly," Gabriella said. "He has your eyes." "He's a good boy," Elizabeth said, her voice fading. "Deserves better than an orphan's fate." Gabriella sighed, the anger that had sustained her for so long beginning to dissolve, not into forgiveness exactly, but something adjacent to it, a release, a letting go. "I'll speak with my husband. We'll figure something out for the boy." Relief washed over Elizabeth's face. "Thank you," she breathed. "I don't deserve your mercy." "No," Gabriella agreed quietly, "but he does." She stayed a while longer, listening as her mother slipped in and out of consciousness, occasionally sharing fragments of the years they'd spent apart. It was nearly sunset when Elizabeth finally fell into a deep sleep, her breathing shallow but steady. Gabriella emerged from the sick room to find Vaughn sitting at the table with Thomas Jr., the two engaged in a game of checkers while her children watched. The boy looked up at her appearance, his expression wary and hopeful in equal measure. "She's sleeping," Gabriella told James, who hovered nearby. "The doctor should look in on her tonight." Vaughn rose, crossing to her side. "Are you all right?" She nodded, leaning against him momentarily before approaching the boy at the table. "Thomas, I'm your sister, Gabriella." The boy stood awkwardly, unsure of the proper response. "Mother speaks of you often," he said finally. "Says you're smart as a whip." A ghost of a smile crossed Gabriella's face. "That's kind of her to say." She gestured to her children, who watched the exchange with curiosity. "These are your nieces and nephew Victor, Samuel, and Catherine." The children exchanged shy greetings, the twins particularly fascinated by this new relative. Vaughn remained close to Gabriella, his presence a silent question. That night, in the hotel room they'd taken near the station after the children were asleep, Gabriella finally broke down, letting Vaughn hold her as years of pain poured out in quiet sobs. "I wanted to hate her," she confessed. Thought I still did, but seeing her there so diminished. It doesn't mean you have to forgive what she did, Vaughn reminded her, stroking her hair. Understanding isn't the same as absolution. Gabriella nodded against his chest. The boy, though, he reminds me of myself at that age, lost, uncertain. What are you thinking? Vaughn asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. She pulled back to look at him. Could we take him, raise him alongside our children? Vaughn considered this, his expression thoughtful. It would change things. Another mouth to feed, another heart to tend. If you think it's too much, he stopped her with a gentle finger to her lips. I think our home has room for one more. If that's what you want, Gabriella, we'll make it work. Elizabeth O'Malley Foster died 3 days later, slipping away in the early morning hours with Gabriella at her bedside. The burial was simple, attended only by family Gabriella and Vaughn, their children Thomas Jr. and James Foster. As the last spadefuls of earth covered the grave, Gabriella stood with her arm around her half-brother's shoulders, feeling his slight trembling. What happens to me now? He asked, his voice small but composed. Gabriella exchanged a glance with Vaughn, who nodded encouragingly. You'll come home with us, she said. To Wisconsin, if that's what you want. The boy looked up at her, hope battling with suspicion in his young face. Why would you want me? After what they did to you, Gabriella knelt before him, meeting his gaze directly. Because you're innocent in all this, because you're my brother, and because I know what it feels like to be left behind. Thomas Jr. studied her face, searching for deception and finding none. Will I have to call you mother? A smile tugged at Gabriella's lips. No, you can call me Gabriella or sister if you prefer. You had a mother. I'm not trying to replace her. The journey back to Wisconsin was markedly different from their westward trek. Thomas Jr., who asked to be called simply Thomas, gradually relaxed as the miles passed, drawn into conversation by Victor's friendly overtures and the twins' endless questions. By Chicago, he was tentatively joining their games. By the time they reached Milwaukee, he was laughing alongside them. Arriving home at the ranch, Gabriella watched as Thomas took in the sprawling property, the horses in the pasture, the sturdy house with smoke curling from its chimney. This is all yours, he asked, awe evident in his voice. Ours, Vaughn corrected, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Your family now. The integration wasn't without challenges. Thomas, used to city life, found ranch chores bewildering at first. There were nightmares and moments of withdrawal, natural grief compounding the massive change in his circumstances. But there were beautiful moments, too. The first time he successfully rode a horse on his own, his face split by a grin of pure joy. The evening he voluntarily joined Victor in helping Vaughn repair a fence. The afternoon Gabriella found him reading to Catherine, his voice patient as she struggled with difficult words. By Christmas, 6 months after their return from California, Thomas had claimed his place in the family. Watching him hang a carved wooden ornament on their tree, a gift he'd made himself with Vaughn's guidance, Gabriella felt a sense of completion that had eluded her for years. You've given him a home, Vaughn observed that night as they prepared for bed. More than that, you've given him belonging. Gabriella thought about this as she brushed her hair, now streaked with occasional strands of silver. Perhaps I needed to do it, she admitted. To close the circle somehow. Vaughn came to stand behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Do you ever think about them, your stepfather and his family? Less and less, she answered truthfully. They're like characters from a story someone told me once, not quite real anymore. He nodded, understanding. And your mother, Gabriella set down her brush, considering. I've made my peace with her, I think. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. She was flawed, desperately so, but in the end, she tried to make amends the only way she knew how. By entrusting her son to you. Yes, Gabriella turned to face him. What about you? Do you ever regret taking in a half-frozen stranger all those years ago, changing the course of your solitary life? Vaughn's laugh was warm as he drew her into his arms. Not for a single moment. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me, Gabriella Adams. Everything good in my life came from that snowy day. As the years continued to pass, the Adams Ranch flourished, becoming one of the most respected in southern Wisconsin. Victor, now a young man of 20, partnered with his father in expanding their horse breeding operation. The twins, 16 and full of plans, excelled in their studies, Catherine determined to become a teacher like her mother, Samuel showing promise as a veterinarian. And Thomas, 18 and steady, managed the cattle side of the ranch with a natural aptitude that made Vaughn proud. Mineral Point had grown as well, the railroad bringing new opportunities and connections. Gabriella continued teaching part-time, now focusing on adult education for immigrant families settling in the area. Her classroom in the new brick schoolhouse often buzzed with conversation in multiple languages as newcomers learned English alongside American history and mathematics. On a crisp autumn evening in 1890, as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with family and close friends gathered around long tables in their yard, Gabriella found a quiet moment alone with Vaughn near the creek that marked the eastern boundary of their property. 20 years, she marveled, her hand warm in his. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found me in the snow. Vaughn pulled her close, his arms as strong as ever despite the silver now prominent in his hair. Best decision I ever made, riding out in that blizzard. Gabriella leaned against him, watching the sunset paint the Wisconsin sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Do you remember what you said to me that day, when I was barely conscious? Called you the luckiest unfortunate soul I'd ever come across, Vaughn recalled, chuckling. You were wrong, though, Gabriella said, turning in his arms to face him. I wasn't lucky, I was blessed. She cupped his face in her hands, the face she'd loved through youth and now into middle age. You gave me warmth when I was cold, love when I was abandoned, and a home when I was lost. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. Vaughn kissed her then, tender and familiar. We saved each other, Gabriella, and built something beautiful in the process. From the direction of the house came the sound of laughter and music, their children and friends celebrating the life they'd created together. Gabriella smiled, taking Vaughn's hand to lead him back to the gathering. Come on, Cowboy, she said, her eyes bright with joy. Our family's waiting. Together, they walked toward the lights of home. Two people who had found in each other everything they needed: warmth, love, and the courage to begin again.